So as you heard, Canada will remove all retaliatory tariffs on U.S. products on goods covered under CUSMA, and this takes effect September 1st. Let's start there with Catherine Fortin LeFaivre, Senior Vice President, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Do you see this as a way of trying to appease Washington to allow more positive trade talks to come?
Well, it does look like that's the case. I mean, look, we've seen so many different types of tariff announcements over the last 9 months. And it's really important when you're considering the impact on the Canadian economy to think about the bigger picture here. And presumably that's what the Prime Minister is doing. The most important thing here is to set the conditions for the most favorable trade review as possible as we head into the CUSMA or USMCA review of July 1st, 2026. So there's going to be many announcements along the way, but we have to keep our eye on the ball. And by removing counter tariffs on CUSMA compliant goods, it does show that the Prime Minister likely wants to make sure that carve out that we benefit from is maintained and that we can pave the way to as favorable of a review as possible.
So with this latest move, and I know you're anticipating more, we should all anticipate more moves soon, will this be less confusing for Canadian businesses to have the retaliatory tariffs now pulled back?
I mean, look, we follow this daily, hourly, if you wish, and it's confusing for everybody. And there's a lot of exceptions too, right? And so I don't know that it's any less confusing. I think it depends on the sector at hand. I mean, certainly for many businesses, this is good news because it was seen on it was considered for some as just making the situation worse. But for other businesses that are, impacted greatly, the ones who are not captured under the CUSMA carve-out, such as such as steel and aluminum, they're very much in the same boat. Like nothing has improved from this announcement for them. And in fact, a lot of them are our members, and we know that they're quite disappointed that Canada is not taking a more forceful approach and is actually, conceding more. So it really does depend on the sectors. There's different magnitude of impact. And so it's very important when the federal government makes these decisions that, they do work really closely with those impacted sectors and with businesses as a whole to really look at, what are the costs and benefits of doing this, and that they're very surgical in those announcements. Blanket approaches will probably not work here. So it is interesting to see, on one hand, it's appeasing or it's giving the Trump administration another element off their grievance list that they can check off, right? We know there was the digital sales tax, DST. We followed the U.S. a year ago. Canada did with Chinese EV tariffs at 100%, mirroring what the U.S. approach was. Canada has announced a really huge increase in NATO spending as Trump had requested. So we're checking off a lot of grievances, which one would think is setting us up to be in a better situation. But we can't help but ask, how many concessions can we afford to give, and is it really helping us? So that is also a fair question here.
I'm wondering, and I know you deal with various kinds of businesses, so more generally speaking, do you feel like businesses are still in a holding pattern for spending because things change constantly and because there has been no trade deal signed off on?
That's a really great question. And actually, our Business Data Lab, BDL, which is a group of economists that work within the Canadian Chamber have done a lot of research on that. And they had this summer findings from a recent survey on Canadian businesses. And interestingly enough, there has been movement. So we're seeing that 27% of Canadian exporters are moving away from the U.S. as their target sales market. We're seeing that 37% of Canadian exporters are diversifying their supply chains away from the U.S., and that's just in a 4-month time span in the spring. And so, and then there's, a lot of other types of businesses that are, really just staying put and waiting. So it does depend on the sector that you're in, but we're seeing at least some movement towards diversification while others are waiting to see what will materialize. But we're also kind of getting used to this uncertainty in a I don't know if it's a good thing, but I think businesses are also realizing that it probably won't be certain. The certainty will probably not come for, overnight. I think there's hope that with the CUSMA review, again, playing the long game, which will be starts July 1st or sooner, could start before that, that will provide a little bit more stability, but it's, being realistic here, it's probably just going to keep being a very bumpy, unpredictable road between now and then.
Got it. I do have to leave it there. Catherine Fortin LeFaivre is with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Thanks for your time.